midterm exam will be 2 pre-response style questions that are similar to what we've been doing over the last 2 weeks. So very similar to the question that we looked at last week, number 1 from 2012, and very similar to question number 1 from 2013. Okay, so you'll have 2 questions that are very similar to those 2, and you will have all day to work on them. However, you won't have all day to answer them. So I'm not exactly sure how it'll work yet, but we'll say you'll have we'll say like an hour and a half, which is actually double the amount of time you'll be given on the AP exam. So we'll make it like an hour and a half, and you'll have an hour and a half to sit down and answer those 2 questions. Okay, so once you open it, you'll have 90 minutes to complete the 2 questions. All right, but you will be able to go in and work on those 2 questions at any point in the day on Friday. So it's not like you have to log in at 11 a.m. and do it, because I know everyone's schedule is a little bit different. You have siblings and parents and perhaps other relatives that are using the computer you're using and stuff like that. Haven't decided yet, Brittany, but I'm thinking about giving it through AP Classroom. So we'll go from there. Yeah, most likely through AP Classroom. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the FRQ from 2013, number 1. So I have that question pulled up. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you. In case you don't have it up, you can take a look at my screen. Okay. I am muted. Whoa. Hang on a second. My screen is doing some crazy stuff. Hang on. All right. Let's try that again. Terrific. Okay. Just want to make sure that I am, it seems it's like I'm muted. I just want to confirm that everybody can hear me. Can everyone hear me? All right, terrific. Okay, so let's take a look at the question. So I'm on 2013, number 1. And as is pretty common with these types of questions, and when I say these types of questions, I'm referring to the methods and control structure questions, which will be one of the 2 questions that you get on your exam next month, okay? And I believe May 15th is the date. So just as we observed with the 2012 question, there are 2 classes here, and we have a has a relationship. So the music downloads class has a relationship with the download info class. And we know this because a music downloads object is a list of download info objects. Okay, and this is very similar, almost identical to what we observed in the 2012 question. Now there are some differences between the 2. They're not exactly the same. The methods that you're going to implement are a little bit different. So let's just talk about the first class and what's given to us and what isn't. So in this class, download info, it's really like a skeleton class here. And what I mean by that is we're given all of the sort of important or necessary information in order to answer the FRQ, but in order to actually run a program, we're going to need to fill some things in here. So we're told that a music website keeps track of downloaded music. For each download, the site uses a download info object to store, and this is important, to store a song's title and the number of times it has been downloaded. A partial declaration for the download info class is shown below. So as we're told, only a partial declaration is given, but we need to fill in the blanks in order to get everything to compile, execute, and test the things that we've been set out to test. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, what do I have to fill in here that isn't already filled in for me? Well, very simply, anything that says implementation not shown, you're going to have to fill in your Replit or JDoodle or whatever it is you're using. Now, it's important to point out that these are things that are not required for submission in terms of the solution to the problem. However, these are things that we need to write the implementations for if we are going to test the program in an IDE like Replit or JDoodle. So we know that after the class declaration, we must always have our private instance variables. And we can figure out what the private instance variables are going to be by examining the characteristics of the object for this class. So an object of this class, as we know, as we've just been told, has a title, a song title, and the number of times it's been downloaded. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at our download info class. So I have my class declaration, and I have my two private instance variables, title and num downloads. And of course, title is a string and num downloads is an integer, int. Next up, we have our constructor. Now, notice the constructor has only one parameter. Sometimes we get stuck, right? We get stuck in doing the same thing over and over and over again. And computer science, every problem is a little bit different. Even if they seem exactly, the two problems seem exactly the same, or two seem exactly the same, there's usually subtle differences between the two. And just because we have two private instance variables doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have two formal parameters here in the constructor. However, it is rather common for that to happen. That's not the case in this particular example. We have to think about what's logical. So we know, in fact, we're told in the comments here, and I'll go to the actual problem. Right here, it says creates. Remember, this set of comments is for the constructor. Any comments that are above something relate to what's below it. So creates a new instance with the given unique title and sets the number of times downloaded to 1. So I can repeat that. Sets the number of times downloaded to 1. So it's not necessary. In fact, it would pose a future or a potential problem for us if we included a num times downloaded variable as a parameter here in the constructor, because we do not want to allow the user to be able to define how many times the song has been downloaded. The default value will be set to 1. So the number of times downloaded for a song will be 1 when the object is created. In order to increase the number of times downloaded, you will have to make a call to the increment times downloaded method. All right? And once again, that's something that we're going to have to fill in. That's not really a part of the problem, but it is something that we'll have to fill in if we want to be able to run this program. Okay? So with that said, we assign title, which is our private instance variable, to the value of title with a capital T, passing that parameter value to the title with the lowercase t, which is again our private instance variable. And as we were instructed right here, we are told to set the number of times downloaded variable to 1. Okay? Num downloads to 1. Next up, we are given 2 methods without implementations that are shown. However, we are told what they do. So we're told that the getTitle method returns the title, and that the increment times downloaded method, it returns nothing, return type of void, but it increments the number of times downloaded variable by 1. So it just increases that variable value by 1. And we can observe both of those 2 things here. So public string getTitle returns the title, and public void increment times downloaded, num downloads plus equals 1, which is the same thing as saying num downloads is assigned to num downloads plus 1. This is just the shorthand for that. Okay, so you can also see here that I've included this toString method, which again is not required, nor is it necessary. However, I've commented it out, and I'm going to bring it back later on because there's a point that I would like to illustrate about what's going to print out and what's not going to print out later on when we go to test things in the main method. Okay? So hopefully everybody was able to fill out the download info class with the implementations that weren't shown. However, we need to include them if we're going to make everything run smoothly here. So before I move any further, are there any questions with regards to what has been illustrated here in the download info class? Is there anything that needs to be touched upon further before we move on? What about hexadecimal, Tammin? Yes, we're going to get to. Is that a question or a statement you're making? Okay, good. Yes, so we'll get to that. Is there any points for completing the downloaded? Clementina, good question. No, there are no points awarded for that. Okay, so again, that is why if you look on the AP Classroom website, they'll tell you that you are allowed to use an IDE. However, they believe that there'll be no advantage in using one, because if you do use one, in order to get things to run, in order for you to actually be able to test your solutions to the problem, you're going to have to potentially fill out all sorts of information that's not really given to you. So they tell you how these methods work, right? They're telling you how they work, but if you want to actually test things, you're going to have to write in that code yourself, and you have to be confident that you wrote the right code so that when you go to test your solution, right, it's giving you back the appropriate feedback, assuming you included the appropriate code for the things you didn't have to code, okay? Vivida, it's possible that you would be asked to write a toString method on the exam, but I have not seen that. I don't believe I've seen it in any of the FRQs. But again, it's certainly possible. So Vivida, just to hit on that point, since we're talking about toString, just remember that every class has a default toString method that's invisible, that can't be seen. And what that toString method does is it returns a reference to the object of that class. And what that means is, if you say system.out_print and then an object that belongs to that class, it's going to print the hexadecimal representation of that object, which is a reference to the object of where it exists in the memory or the space of the program. Okay, and only if you do a method override, okay, if you override the default toString method, will you be able to print specific information about that object. all right? And we can actually illustrate that later on in our review of this problem. All right, terrific. So I've got a bunch of notes here. I just want to make sure I covered everything. Not required. Okay, so that's the first page of notes. Not part, what is a, okay, terrific. So let's go back, and now we're going to assess the music downloads class. So we're told right here that the list of downloaded information is stored in a music downloads object. A partial declaration for the music downloads class is shown below. Now this is important as well. We are tasked with completing or writing the implementation for the get download info method, as well as the update downloads method. So it would seemingly be accurate that this class is only missing the implementations for those two methods, okay? And what you'll find is that you're going to run into a little bit of trouble because there's actually a method that we're going to need to include, okay? There's a method that we're going to need to include here in this class that's not seen, that actually refers to the 2012 problem, okay? And you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. So let's go ahead and get started with this class. So the first thing you want to ask yourself when you start to scan through this class is, okay, what are the characteristics of an object from this class? So what are the attributes or the characteristics of a music downloads class? And to answer that question, we take a look at the private instance variables. The private instance variables are things that will pertain to the objects of this class. And then, of course, we look inside of the constructor, which tells us exactly what characteristics or traits a music downloads object will have. So we see there's only one private instance variable, which isn't to say that there could be more. However, we won't need any more than what's given to us right here. So we have this download list variable, which refers to a list object of download info objects. So let me rephrase that. A music downloads object is simply a list of download info objects. Now remember, we can have lists of strings, we can have lists of integers, we can have lists of any user-defined object, and that's precisely what we have here. A music downloads object is a list of download info objects, and we know that download info objects have two attributes. They have a song title and the number of times that song has been downloaded, okay? In the constructor, we can see that the download list has been appropriately initialized. Okay, so it's been initialized to a new array list of download info objects, and then we have the opening and closing parentheses. Okay, and we're even told that right here, creates a list of downloaded information. All right, so the get download info method, we're given a whole bunch of information right here, and this is important to read. So it says, this method is going to return a reference to the download info object. It's not going to return a string. It's not returning how many times the song has been downloaded. It's simply going to return a reference to the object. And notice the return type of the method is download info. So download info is a type. It is the type that's been defined in the previous class. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code now. And one of the things that we need here is an add download method. So in the previous question that we worked on from 2012, that was precisely what we were tasked with doing. We were tasked with writing the implementation for two different types of methods where we were adding a climbing object, right? And then we had the add climb alpha where it was done in alphabetical order. So this class lacks this method where we're adding a user-defined object to a list. So if you want this to run the way it's supposed to, you're going to have to add this method here. All right. And once again, that is why the AP board says that using an IDE will not provide any advantage. It's because they're not anticipating you thinking of all of these different things, of filling in the gaps. You're to assume that you're able to just simply add download info objects to the list without any problem. That is only a partial declaration for the classes shown, and that you're to assume anything that's not there, that everything just works the way it's supposed to, okay? And the reason that this is needed is you'll see in my main method here. So I've got a couple different songs, the songs that they give me. I've got the web music A variable, which is a music downloads object. And notice I had to say web music A dot add download, and then what am I adding to the list? I'm adding these songs: Hey Jude, Soul Sister, and Aqualung. Okay, without that method add download, we wouldn't otherwise be able to add these objects to this list. Okay, so that was something else that needed to be filled in that wasn't given to us. And that was even more difficult or tricky than us sort of filling in the blanks for the download info class, because at least that said implementation not shown, whereas this particular method, add download, there was no real hint that we needed it in order to make things run properly in the main method. So back to the music downloads class, I added this in here so that it would help us run things in the main method later on. For the actual method itself, get download info says to be implemented in part A, returns download info object, title and num downloads. Those are the characteristics of a download info object, but those two things are not going to actually be returned. It returns a reference to this object, and then it returns null if the title doesn't exist in the download list. Okay? So you can use one of two things. You can use a for each loop, or you can use a for loop. For part A, I used a for loop. For part B, I used a for each loop, just to show you the differences of how they look. And we can examine the solution set that's provided by the AP board to sort of highlight the differences between the two. So I have just a standard for loop. Int I is assigned to 0 as long as I is less than the size of the list, and we're going to increase by 1, so I++. Now, if download list.getI, so remember, download list is the list of download info objects. So .getI will get the object from the list. It will get the download info object from the list. And remember, this line of code here represents a music downloads object, because a music downloads object is a list of download info objects. So we have the download list.getI, which gets the element from the list. Then we need to get the title from that object, and we need to compare it to, and I don't mean compare it to using the compare to method, I mean there needs to be a comparison, and that comparison is done by using the dot equals method, and the parameter there would be title, the title that's given to us. So if the title of the download info object matches the title that's given to us in the parameter, then you're going to return that object. And don't forget, I mentioned this last week, that return acts as a sort of, there are similarities to it to the keyword break. So if I say return that element, we're not going to continue to loop through the rest of the list. Okay? So once the title matches one of the titles of the download info objects in the list, it will stop looping and go ahead and return that object reference straight away. Okay? Now, one of the things that you need to think about is if it were to continue looping through, then what would happen is it would return null every single time, because if it kept looping through, then we could assume that whatever the last element is in the list would not necessarily match up that the title was given. So I guess I should say it wouldn't return null every time, but it would return null every single time unless the last download info object in the list, unless that song title matched the title that was given to us. So again, the return keyword in many ways acts as a break. So as soon as this condition is met, is true, then we will return precisely what we found. So would it or would it not work with an else statement? It's a good question. Let me go back. So you're saying, Brittany, if underneath my if here I put else, and then in the else I put returned null, like that? It's a good question. Let me think about it for a second. Let me look at it. I mean, of course, we could always run it. It might just be redundant code. I'm not sure that it wouldn't work because, again, well, let's think about it. No, actually, I don't think it would work, Brittany, because look, because the return keyword acts as a break, let's say you're at the first element in the list, okay? And the first element in the list is Soul Sister, but the title of the song you gave was Hey Jude, when Hey Jude is actually it's the second element in the list. You're never actually going to get there because the else part of the conditional will be executed and it will return null, and then it'll exit the loop. And thus, you'll never reach the second element in the list because we said return null. So we'll break from the loop and return that value. So no, it won't work. It may work under certain circumstances, like when the title you give is the first element in the list. But if the title you give is anywhere else in the list other than the first element, then it won't work. Do you understand that? Good. Matthew picked up on it. Good. All right. Terrific. Good. Great question, Brittany. Great question. All right. So let's go ahead and delete that back out. Okay. So we're only going to return null if after we've completely finished iterating through the loop, we don't get a match between the title that's the parameter and us getting the title from each download info object in the list. Okay. So that's part A. And if we go to our main method here, I've got 3 songs, song 1, song 2, song 3. They're download info objects, new download info, Hey Jude, Soul Sister, and Aqualung, which were given to us in the question. So if I go to part A here, I'm told, for example, suppose variable web music A refers to an instance of music downloads, and that the table below represents the contents of the download list. The list contains 3 download info objects. So first in my main method, I need to create 3 download info objects, Hey Jude, Soul Sister, and Aqualung, okay? And if I want to get them to reflect the number of downloads that are illustrated here with 5, 3, and 10, I'm going to have to make several calls to the update downloads, sorry, not the update downloads, several calls to the increment times downloaded method to get them to reflect those numbers. So I didn't do that because it would just take, right, I'd need to call that this method 4 times to get it to say 5. I need to call it twice for this object so that it would update to 3, and I need to call it 9 times to get it to, to say 10. So that was just a lot of extra code that I didn't feel was necessary. So if we go back, I created my 3 download info objects. I added those 3 download info objects to Web Music A, and Web Music A is a music downloads object. Then I tested my get download info method. So I said Web Music A dot get download info Soul Sister. So Soul Sister is one of the 3 song titles that belong to a download info object in this list. So when I say system.out.print webmusic.getDownloadInfoA, it should return a reference to that object. So if I go ahead and run it, notice right here it says download info at 2C7B84DE. Okay, and this is, so it's returning a reference to the object. Remember, Web Music A is a music downloads object, and we know that a music downloads object is a list of download info objects. So it makes perfect sense that it returned this reference right here. Okay? Now, just to make sure that my increment times downloaded method was working, I said song2, which is Soul Sister, increment times downloaded. I did that twice. I just printed out a blank line, just have a little space there. System.out.print web music A get download info Soul Sister. The reason I did that was, and I'll show you later on, was to see if my toString method was working correctly. And again, there's no, this question says nothing about the toString method. I was just trying to make the class more comprehensive once I had finished answering everything I was supposed to, okay? Here's what I would like to illustrate though, right? So we know that the method should return null if a song title is not found anywhere in the list. So system.out.print webmusic.a.getDownloadInfo Stairway to Heaven. Well, we know that Stairway to Heaven is not a song title of any of the download info objects in the class, right? There are 3 download info objects in the class. Hey Jude, which has, however many downloads, Soul Sister, which has, I think, 3 downloads, and Aqualung, which is supposed to have 10 downloads. So notice that this returned the keyword null, okay? That returned the keyword null. All right, so before we move on to part B, are there any questions? Yeah, you can just think of it as an array list, Tanmim. All right, let's take a look at part B then. So part B tells us write the music downloads method update downloads, which takes a list of song titles. All right, so this is a little bit different. It's not something we've never seen before. It's just something we haven't done in a while. So when it says it takes a list of song titles, that means that we're going to have a parameter, that the parameter of this method is going to be a list of strings because they're a list of song titles. Okay, and we'll see that. They give that to us right here. It says right here, update downloads, and then it gives us the parameter, which is a list of song titles, which are strings. Okay. For each title in the list, the method updates download list. Okay. Either by incrementing the download count if the download info object with the same title exists. All right. So we're given a list of song titles. If we find a song title that's already, if it matches something that's in our list, then for each time we find that song title, we'll increment it by 1. If we are given a song title that's not in our list, then we will add it. We'll create an object, right? We can't just add a song title to the list because our list, the download list, remember, download list is a music downloads object, which is a list of download info objects. I know it's so confusing to say that, but it's not a list of strings, okay? The music download objects, they're not it's not a list of strings. It's a list of download info objects. And download info objects have 2 pieces of information. They have the song title and the number of times that the song has been downloaded, okay? So somewhere in this method, we're going to have to create a download info object, okay? Because that's what we're adding to the list. So again, if we don't find the name of that song anywhere, then we're going to add it to the list. If we do find it, then we're going to increment the num times downloaded variable by 1. And that's all there is to it, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and tackle this method. So here I used a for each loop, and I can rewrite the solution. In fact, we'll do it because it's good practice. We'll rewrite the solution using the standard for loop as well in just a minute. So before I do that, let's just talk a little bit about this solution. So this says for each element in the list titles is the list, and element is a string. The reason element is declarative type string is because each element in the titles list is a string, okay? So for each element in the titles list, we're going to create a new object called found info, and it's of type download info. And we're going to make a call to the get download info method where element is the parameter. And again, remember, element is just a string, which is a song title. So get download info, if we find that song title, okay, if we find that song title in the list, then it gets incremented. The increment times download method is called, and it will update how many times the song has been downloaded. But let me just start that over. So if it's not found, meaning it returns null. So this here again, this is a call to the method we just wrote the implementation for. Okay. So by calling get download info with a parameter element is a element that's in this list here. So if it returns null, that means that the song wasn't found anywhere in the list. And thus, if found info, right here, so found info is going to store one of 2 things. It's going to store, store a download info object, a reference to a download info object. So it's either going to store a reference to a download info object that was found in the list, or it's going to store null if it wasn't found. That's exactly what we just coded up above. So if it's not found, it's going to store null. So if it's equal to null, then we're just going to use the add method that we get to use for lists. So the download list dot add, and we're adding a new download info object where element is the string that represents the title of that object. And remember, to create a download info object, it needs one parameter. It needs a string that represents the song title. So if we go back to the download info class, we can see that right here. Okay, a download info object has one parameter, which is a string, and that represents the title of the song. And of course, when you create that download info object, the num downloads variable gets assigned to 1. So right here, we're adding a new download info object with the parameter element. Element is the string that represents the title in the list that's given to us as a parameter, and that gets added to the download list. Else, if, meaning it's not null, so meaning we actually get a reference, then this new found info, which is a download info object, dot increment times downloaded, so it'll increase the number of times downloaded. And again, we wrote the implementation for that right here. We didn't have to in our solution, but we had to in order to make this whole thing work. So it'll increase the number of downloads by 1. Okay? And again, found info represents a download info object. Somebody has, I see lots of comments, oh boy. Why don't we need to write new download info? Let me go back. Why don't we or why do we, Melanie? Like when we created found info. So when we created found info, I see. Good question. Let me think for a second. Get download info. Equals. All right, we can try that. I think it's because this represents new download info object. Okay, it's initializing it to that new object. So we can try and do it in that way as well after we finish running through everything. Okay, that's a good question. We'll come back to it. Okay, so let's take a look at and see if this method works as it's supposed to. Okay. And one thing I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to uncomment out my toString method. Okay. All right. So for part B, which is down here, I have this rock song list. So I have to create a list that's going to represent the parameter for the update downloads method. So I have this rock song list. And I didn't do it exactly the same way they did it in the example, but I have Stairway to Heaven, Let It Be, Hey Jude, and then Soul Sister. So I'm going to be adding these songs to the existing Web Music A object. And we know that Web Music A has already in it Hey Jude, Soul Sister, and Aqualung. So when we finish executing this, and let me, okay, just give it 1 second. I'm going to comment out these 2 lines of code. Okay, so we have Hey Jude, which means it's been downloaded once, Soul Sister's been downloaded once, Aqualung's been downloaded once. Now, after saying webmusic.a update downloads, Stairway to Heaven will get added to the list, Let It Be will get added to the list, and then Hey Jude was added twice. So the number of downloads for Hey Jude is now up to 3, and Soul Sister should be now up to 2. So if I say system.out.println webmusic.getDownloadInfo Hey Jude, it should tell me how many times it's been downloaded, which is 3, and excuse me, Soul Sister will be 2. So let's go ahead and run it. Note that I uncommented out my toString method, so it's going to print information about, it's going to actually print the information now. Okay, so Soul Sister, and this actually goes back up to the top, which is right here, line 16. So get download info for Soul Sister has 1 download. Soul Sister number of downloads, I did it again here. For some reason, I have it a second time. I'm just going to delete that. There was no reason for having that again. I'm going to rerun it. Sorry, just be patient. Oh boy, please work. We're dealing with some slow internet. Well, while we're waiting for that, okay, although I did already say what it should be, we're just now trying to confirm that it is what it should be. The webmusic.a.getDownloadInfo for Hey Jude. So if I go back to my download info class where I have the toString method, it's going to return the title and then on a new line, number of downloads, and then print out how many downloads there were or are. So it should say Hey Jude and then the number of downloads 3, and then for Soul Sister it should say Soul Sister and then number of downloads 2. I'm going to stop this and try and run it again. Come on. Oh, brother. There we go. Okay. So Soul Sister, number of downloads 1. That was from this SOP up top in line 16. Then we have null as a result of this SOP, webmusic.a.getDownloadInfo Stairway to Heaven. Okay. Then we created this list called Rock Song List, which is a list of strings. We added all of them to the Rock Song list. We then used that list as our parameter for the update downloads method. Then we said system.out.print webmusic.a.getDownloadInfo for Hey Jude. Notice it says Hey Jude, number of downloads 3. Hey Jude was added twice, and it had already been downloaded once, so that's how we got the number 3. And then Soul Sister, number of downloads 2. So that worked appropriately as well. Let's just see what some kind of questions we have here. Can you still do part B as a for loop so I can check my answer, please? Absolutely. I just wrote a break in that method. All right, Matthew, you'll have to, I'm not sure where you did the break. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I translated line found info equal null properly. Absolutely. All right, so before we come back to your question, Melanie, I'm going to just do the regular for loop first. Absolutely. Okay, so let's do the regular for loop. Okay. All right, let's do the regular for loop. I know we don't love the for each loop. Okay. So that was the else. That's my for loop. All right, so just right underneath it, I'm going to type it out. That way I can cut this and paste it back in. All right, so for int I is assigned to 0, as long as I is less than the size of the list. What list? Well, the name of the list is titles. So titles dot size. Okay. And I++, we want to iterate through the whole list one by one. So this is this line of code we're going to have again. However, instead of element represents the element from the list. So let's think about this for a second. Element, how do we get something from the list? We have to use the get method. So get download info would be titles. We actually have to get element from the list. So titles.get I. So titles.get I translates to element. Okay? So anywhere in the code where I see element, I'm going to have to write titles.get I. Okay? So if found info equals null, then download list.add new download info titles.get I. Okay? And then we have our else. Else found info dot increment times downloaded. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just cut this. We can bring it back in a bit if we need to. So for int is assigned to I is less than titles.size, I++. So we have this found info variable, which represents a download info object, which is being assigned to get download info titles.get I. All right, this looks good. Let's go ahead and run it and just make sure everything is the same. And everything's exactly the same as it was when we used the for each loop. So we successfully converted it from the for each loop to the for loop. I'll go back so that you can take a look at the solution. I'm just going to leave it up for a minute. Give you a second to digest it, and then I'll go back to the comment section. Yes. Give me just a second, Tim. Anything else anybody would like to take a look at before I try to take a look at Melanie's question again? I'm going to go back. I'm just going to take a look at the code. Tim, let me know if you need to see the main method again. So found info. Found info is assigned to new download info and new download info. So we said Melanie, I'm going to have to think about that more. I don't have the answer to you right now to that question. Anything else anybody would like to see? Terrific. Glad it's working, Kenan. Anything else from the code anybody would like to see? All right, well, if not, Melanie's question, Matthew, was for the found info variable. So we had download info, found info. Here, I'll just share my screen with you again. So normally, right, when you declare a variable, it's been declared of type download info. Why didn't we then say new download info and then in parentheses, you know, whatever that was? So that was the question. I'm going to have to think more about it. But if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to post one more problem since we are checking if the song already exists. Since we are checking if the song already exists. Get download info. Yeah, I see what you mean, Matthew. I just need to think of a better way to explain it. That's all. But in the meantime, I'm going to assign one more FRQ of this style that but I thought found info wasn't initialized yet. Well, you can declare and initialize in the same line. And that is what we're doing. But just to say, I'm going to assign one more problem that will be due Thursday. And we'll go over that problem on Thursday, and then you'll have your exam to work on Friday. Since that method already returns a download info object. I see what Matthew's saying, and I know it's confusing because we've never seen anything like this before. So what Matthew's saying is that the return type of this method of, hold on, let me go back and present so that you can see what he's saying. So what he's saying is that since, let me give it a second. Okay. So the get download info method, right, has a return type of download info. And since the get download info method returns a download info object, it's sort of in a level of abstraction where it's like saying new download. We don't need to say new download info. Okay, so when you write new download, right? That's a call to the constructor. So that's the initialization that we call instantiating. When you instantiate the object, you're making a call to the constructor. So the reason we don't have to say new download is because we don't need to call the constructor to make a new download info object. That is abstracted away in saying get download info, because the return type of get download info is a download info object. So that's all sort of hidden away in here. Okay, by saying download list.getI, we're getting the element, we're getting that download info object from the list. So that's why we don't need to say new download info, because again, new download info is a call to that constructor to build a new download info object. And that by default is what is returned from this method here. I know that's really confusing, but that's the reason. Yes, Matthew, that is correct. Melanie, I'll try and see if I can come up with other examples that illustrate this point, because it's confusing to me also, because it's not something that I can recollect we've observed in any other problem besides this one. So, and Matthew, if you can think of other problems we've done in the past that have illustrated this, please let me know, or if you find something. But I'll try to come up with other examples that illustrate this as well. Okay? But other than that, that's all I have for today. Again, we'll meet up on Thursday, same time at noon, to go over the next problem that I post that has to do with this type of question. So if that's it for today, if you don't have any other comments, questions, things that you need to see from the code, then have a wonderful day, and I'll see everybody on Thursday. Okay? Take care, Alex. Bye, Melanie. Take care, Jeff. See everybody on Thursday. Bye-bye.